Hello, boy. How's everyone doing today? Gabe Rizzo's back again, and away we go. Now, this time I'm going to take it down a little bit to a different general direction than I usually go on this show. Now, a couple months back, I mentioned I was going to be occasionally throwing in some TV series, and I did one series of shorts on Japanese, a Japanese horror anthology series, and haven't really touched that topic since. Well, we're touching that topic today. And probably in a series you don't know what I've expected. And that is Reboot. Yeah. Okay. So, yes, I'm reviewing a kid's show. Fuck it, it's my show. I'll review what I want. And technically, this is as sci-fi as it can get. So, I'm not just horror. Mostly horror. My tastes are eclectic. Anyway, so, Reboot. One of the first, if not the first, CG animated TV series dating back to 1994, with a run that spanned through 2001. And I gotta say, I have a soft spot for this, and I was wondering how much of that was going to be nostalgia coming into a rewatch of it. I'd never seen the full series, just bits and pieces along the way, but I remembered from my childhood enjoying what I had seen. Particularly some stuff from the later series that went unusually mature for a kids show. So I wanted to see if it held up to my memory, and I was actually fairly entertained overall. But that does come with some caveats. Now, first off, the plotline. What is Reboot? Uh, yeah, that's a lot to unpack, but general gist is it takes place inside a computer with the digital representation of people, referred to as sprites, going about their daily lives, battling, trying to fend off villains in the form of viruses, and struggling against the games, which the user, which is a mythical godlike figure in this world, sends down in the form of cubes that, if they fail to win the game and beat the user, that section gets nullified, destroying the sector, and anyone who's in it gets turned into a little slug-like creature. There's a lot of weird lore that goes into the whole Reboot world, but as it slowly comes together, it does form a very fascinating whole, particularly seeing how certain elements of computers function into this. Some characters are search engines, for example, or virus protection programs. It's interesting of how it all pans together. So, but there's a lot to unpack here. Now, when I first started my rewatch of it with the first season, I was a little concerned because the first season is very kiddie. I will fully say that. It's very lighthearted, silly, doesn't really... There's very low stakes. The villains are more goofing off half the time than actually being villains, but it does establish a lot of the characters and begins building things up. Though, even when the main villain breaks into a guitar solo at one point, it is silly. Though I do appreciate the first season having a Dire Straits Money for Nothing music video reference. The show has a lot of references in that I don't think kids will get, but they're fun when they show up. But it also introduces our main villain, who I can't remember the actor's name off the top of my head, but is the same voice actor that does Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and he has a certain urbane class to the villain, which I love. And one of the other main villains, Hexadecimal, despite being utterly insane, is one of the more complex characters in the series, and particularly as in the later seasons when they really develop her arc, and she goes from villain to whacked out anti-hero, and it works. Alright, season 2, the animation gets a little bit better. Each season it does progressively improve. The first season's a little difficult, particularly in some of the facial expressions, but every season improves on that. Midway through the second season is when things started kind of taking a turn. They started really world building into some strange concepts, and that's when it started to really pick up. Particularly with when they start going into dealing with the web, which is they differentiate the net and the web. The net would be like civilized space for where all the cities are. The web is essentially outer space and the tentacled nightmares that dwell within. So it's about that point that things start getting darker as they start having to go to war against an invasion from the net. And at the end of Season 2, well, they effectively near kill off one of the main characters, leaving a child to essentially try to fulfill his step into his place and now defend the system, while the main villain is now poised to dominate everything. It still sounds very kiddie, but they take it in darker directions. The main villain almost starts tearing the system down into this dystopia that's... Some of the implications of the genocide this guy's pulling off are terrifying. And in Season 3 was my favorite season. Really kicks that to the next level. First off, they have an Evil Dead reference. Not just an Evil Dead reference, but they have, in one of the game worlds, it's Evil Dead. The user is Bruce Campbell's Ash. Like, catchphrase using, chainsaw hand, everything. So that usually is what would pass for a reference for Evil Dead. This one doesn't stop there. It, in fact, has the whole thing take place in the cabin from Evil Dead. Not just a cabin, the cabin. They faithfully CG recreate the exact cabin from Evil Dead. The kids show. But at that point now, with our kid struggling to live up to being an adult hero, while all the other characters are despairing that the other one's gone, and he's having to deal with propaganda from the villain, it takes some dark turns as he's dealing with the, I don't know if I can live up to this, before failing. They're not afraid to let the characters fail in this, and some of them fail hard. They make a lot of wrong choices and have to deal with the consequences, particularly starting in Season 3. At which point they do kind of a weird jump. No, not weird. Essentially when he actually loses the game, but has a way of essentially riding it out with his game sprite girlfriend. And then the next episode, it's like, looks like it's set years later, as he's been riding GameCubes for what looks like decades, as he's now a grown man. The shift is intense for his transformation. When the little kid here is suddenly, one episode later, the big, strong renegade, and it's clear he's gone through some shit and had to live through it. The series has stakes and weight and consequences, and it's particularly as he's now desperately trying to find his way home, and when he finds the ruin it's become due to his absence. The series, I think, is largely overlooked for how far it goes into a lot of things, and it's a great character study for how these characters, who in the first couple seasons were happy-go-lucky, bright and colorful, are now having to deal with this war that has broken out. So, first season, goofy kitty. Second season has a lot more humor and is better balanced. Third season, my favorite. Very well put together overall. And especially the arc it tells for Enzo, who in the first couple seasons was an obnoxious kid, but seeing his transformation into now a rugged adult that's struggling against going too far with his gun. Season 4 was beautifully animated, and I'm a little torn on. Now, the first chunk of Season 4, it was originally going to then each chunk is essentially a made-for-TV movie that's been hacked up into a couple episodes, but the breaks work for it. The first one, Damon Rising, does finish up one of the arcs that was left over from from Season 3 about the Guardians, who normally defend everything, having been corrupted by a super virus that's trying to take over the net. Well, this season, they deal with that. And while the resolution's a bit weak for Damon, the rest of it plays out very, interestingly, and Damon's an interesting villain. I mean, she's no megabyte or hexadecimal, but not bad. The second part, My Two Bobs, is a little weird as, well, now there's then essentially a Bob that looks like he did in the first season, from there, against the Bob from the later seasons. That's where he's gone through hell, and now one of the main girls is trying to figure out which one she's actually in love with, because while she's gone through all these hard times with the Bob that's been with them the whole time, she can't separate what she's been through and can only remember the bad times now that the time she's given up on him. So as she's dealing with her PTSD in a kid's show, while the other one only just reminds her of all the good times. And, well, for who the real Bob is, I'm not going to say, but she makes the wrong choice. And it nearly costs her everything. And they're not afraid, like I said, to let characters fuck up. I'm a bit disappointed that that's kind of where it ends, with everything about to go to hell again. Because the third part of Season 4 was never produced. That's a shame. I guess the funding got cut, and Season 4 got axed before it finished airing. They did complete two of the main arcs, but they didn't get the follow-up. Which I was unaware of when I was watching this, and was a big disappointment. So that's my main complaint, though I understand there's some unofficial webcomics that do continue on and complete it, but I have not had a chance to read those. And I know in 2018 there was a rekindled series that was barely related. Reboot the Next Generation or something like that. I don't even know. But I heard it wasn't very good. I'll maybe watch it at some point to give it a shot, but the only returning characters are two of the main viruses. And since one of them had already had a redemption arc and a self-sacrifice arc, bringing her back at that point almost feels insulting. So I'm already not keen on that. So, I've talked about a lot of things that work. The characters are the main thing that works. They are amazing. When Enzo grows up into the adult Matrix, he becomes a very cool character. And his girlfriend Andrea I love Andrea. She's amazing. They do a good job at not really damseling her, except for in one instance. And she's usually the one that's just pulling everyone else's fat out of the fryer. So, she's my favorite character. Things that don't work so well, though, well, first off, I'd say Mike the TV. God damn, this character's annoying. And he's meant to be. The characters are constantly yelling at him for being annoying, but he gets worse as the series goes on. And I think the animation on him gets cartoonier, while everything else is getting more serious, which is weird. I know he's there for the kids, but he is a lot to tolerate, particularly when everything is getting more serious. But then, the goofiness of Season 1 is hard to get past if you're just getting into it, and might turn off a lot of first-time viewers. Particularly with some of the facial animations in the first season. Otherwise, they also did this weird censorship thing with the first season or two of the ladies having this weird monoboob thing, rather than looking fully formed, but they did correct that in later seasons. I read that was a weird censorship thing that they were trying to avoid, but the networks forced them to do, but when they changed networks, they were able to finally get past it. But overall, I really have very little bad to say about this series. I'm a big fan overall. For me, this one gets 4 MacGuffins, even with a cliffhanger ending, and that's probably what keeps it from being a 5 in my book. I really did enjoy this. The first season, I will admit, can be a little hard to get through. It is kiddie, it is goofy, but it needs that for the third season's contrast to really hit home. So I think how we got from point A to point B, it still needs to be like that. And wouldn't have as much of an impact. I could probably go on for a while about a lot of the aspects here, but I think I will kind of wrap it up at that point. If you haven't seen the series, I do recommend giving it a shot. Yes, it might be hard to get into at first, but if you stick with it, it does really kick up. Now, I'm going to go down this one. Reboot, 4 MacGuffins. For me, it's a classic, and a little bit of nostalgia that I probably will return to again. So, really happy I tracked it down and bought it. I probably will never stop hoping that they do finally do something to finish off the arcs. I don't think it's impossible, but I know it's unlikely at this point. It has been 20 years. That is a long time. I'm feeling my age. Okay, that's all for me, I think, on this one. Have a good night, everybody.